Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right, enough of that. Welcome to the Stoa, everyone. Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. Stoa is a place for us to cohere in dialogue, what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And we're going to talk about the recent banning of Jim Rutt and a lot of Game B folks from Facebook. Jim is back on Facebook, but he has some interesting thoughts on what happened and a strategy of how to move forward, which I'm quite excited to hear him speak about. So Jim's going to share his thoughts for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A session is an hour in total. So that being said, Jim, welcome back to the Stoa.
Hey, there we go. I'm muting myself. Thank you, Peter. Great to be back. Good to see people interested in what's going on in this odd world that we live in at the moment. I was on a video chat with a young entrepreneur who I've been mentoring on Friday morning, and right before that, I started to write I had posted a promotional post on a podcast, so I can bracket the window almost exactly. Somewhere between 9:50 and 11:05 a.m. Eastern time on Friday, I tried to log in to finish my promo posting for the podcast. Oh, you've been disabled. And then it says, hey, if you want to protest, press this. So I did. And I pressed that and it said, this ban cannot be reviewed. You are permanently banned, you motherfucker. Not minus the motherfucker, right? This is the full death penalty style ban. Non-reviewable, cannot be turned around. So that's the same thing that happened to Brett Weinstein back in November. And so I go, what the fuck? I've actually been sort of on my good behavior lately. Haven't been in any good internet brawls, boom, 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 which I sometimes enjoy being in. Though I had been posting pretty aggressively on free speech on the internet, out in the public internet, plus, doing my usual thing in private groups and what have you. Game B, the Game B group, Rally Point Alpha, a couple other ones that I'm involved with, but, pretty benign stuff. And so, but I was thinking, if they had banned me for talking about free speech on the internet in a fairly temperate and sane way, I am going to really be rip shit. I'm going to go after these sons of bitches, right? And about an hour as I was just getting up a good head of steam, posted over on Twitter, tried to summon a mob, which actually was very successful. Millions of people got the message. We got retweeted by lots of people, including Joe Rogan, yay, and a bunch of other folks. But about an hour later, I started getting info incoming that it probably wasn't about me. The other two admins of the Facebook Game B group were also whacked at exactly the same time. And I go, no, this is peculiar, because they whacked the three admins, but they left alone the four moderators, which in Facebook demonology are somewhat lesser angels that have somewhat lesser power. And they also left the group up. And I go, that's damn peculiar. But we then, further went back on Twitter, and all of us now started whipping up a mob to scream and yell about this, because this now could bring a bigger mob, because this could bring in the Game B adjacent people, of which there are, I don't know, a couple 100,000 at least. And some of those have big platforms, people like Eric Weinstein, Brett Weinstein, and some others. And they and other folks got to work. And again, few more million people were literally pissed off on Twitter about this. And of course, the Game B network has connections to folks who know people, and at least 4 people filed complaints on our behalf with Facebook employees directly, including some of them fairly senior. And I would say that going through channels probably would have taken longer than the 10 hours that we were offline. So I'm guessing, and this is just a guess, that, and of course I just gave away the punchline, but at about 8 p.m., somewhere between 8 and 8:30 on Friday Eastern time, Friday evening, we were having a all hands video chat of the moderators and admins of the Game B group on Facebook. And somebody got an email from someone saying, "Hey, it looks like you're back." And so we all quickly checked and we were all back. So 10 hours later, we were back. We know that Facebook has a team that monitors Twitter for Facebook related shitstorms. So we think that the most parsimonious explanation is that this massive, literally millions of people shitstorm on Twitter bubbled up, got the attention of Liz Bourgeois and her PR team. And then he looked into it and said, why the hell did they ban these people? And reversed it. Though it's also possible that some of the people intervened on our behalf with moderately senior Facebook people. They looked into it and said, that's mighty weird. Why did they ban those people? And they reversed it. It turned out they also reversed another ban that seemed to have been related. There was a completely innocent Game B member who was banned like a week prior. And that was Albert Kim, who just waved his hand. I wasn't going to mention his name because I didn't have permission, but since he did, I'll call him out. And I believe Albert was reinstated simultaneously with the rest of us. So somehow, whether it was the shitstorm or the interventions, somebody at Facebook looked into this and said, what the fuck? Why'd they ban these people? And they threw some switch and unbanned us. And so that's sort of the first level story. We then continued to scratch our heads and say, now, why did they do this, right? We looked at the posts going on in the Game B group, and I don't know how many of y'all are on the Game B group. If you are, raise your hand, shake your hand, wiggle your ears, do something. But it's interesting, but hardly the things likely to call out the police. It's frankly a bunch of pinheads talking about theoretical ideas in the main, and in fact, we actually have a rule against talking about partisan politics that we call Game A politics. God damn it, not interested in it. We don't care about Team Blue and Team Red and their various idiotic shenanigans. Lately, we've even had an additional rule against discussing most current events. We don't want to get dragged into discussions of COVID-19. There's other places on the internet to do that. We're focused on the long game. How do we build a metastable new operating system for society for the next 500 years? And pretty radical stuff, but none of it threatening violence or at all. I mean, not even close, not aligning ourselves with any shitbirds like QAnon or anything. And so we're like just scratching our heads. And truthfully, I can be a little rambunctious online, so it's at least possible that some of my individual posts outside the group, not impossible, could have triggered one of the Facebook's algorithms. But as I said, I've been fairly well behaved, mostly talking about free speech on the internet. But the other two folks, very benign characters in their outside of the group persona. And we all agreed that it had to be Game B centric. So, and then we tie that back with actions back in November, where two of the original founding Game B team, Brett Weinstein and Jordan Hall, were both banned from Facebook within about a week of each other. And again, we spun up a bit of a shitstorm and got them back. Brett took like 3 days. Jordan took like 6 weeks. And so we added that into the data pile, and sort of calmed down. And I thought about it over the weekend, talked to some other people that are knowledgeable, Daniel Schmachtenberger and Jordan and some other folks who I won't name. And after thinking about it, I came up with my Occam's razor hypothesis of what happened, which in some sense is even more ominous than if they had targeted us directly. And that is that Facebook has accidentally, probably, created a war on thought. And you go, what the hell does that mean? Which is that in their attempt to find what they think are bad guys, which I think is a bad idea anyway, as long as you're not advocating something illegal, it should not be their business to be trying to throw you off what has become our de facto public square. But even if you assume that, let's assume that that's a good thing, which I do not assume, by the way, so don't want anybody misquote me on that. Their algorithms apparently are looking for any deviations from the status quo, for what we sometimes call in Game B land the blue church, kind of conventional thinking. And it's probably fine with conventional thinking of Team Red and conventional thinking of Team Blue, conventional thinking of academics, conventional thinking of the United States Chamber of Commerce. Doesn't really matter, right? As long as it's conventional. But unconventional thinking, whether it's QAnon or Jordan Hall or the Game B group, gets flagged as suspicious because it's different, because it's not the status quo or the near neighbor to the status quo. And things were fairly active on the Game B group right prior, but again, nothing at all close to any violation of terms and services. And so this accumulation of non-status quo thinking, fairly esoteric, a lot of it. If you're interested, go to the Game B group. It's world readable. You don't have to even join. Go to the Game B group on Facebook and read it. You'll see. Somewhat pinheaded, somewhat radical, but nothing actionable in terms of service. But nonetheless, it was different. And so my working hypothesis is that Facebook is accidentally spun up AIs to attack thought, anything that's outside of some ring of conventional thinking. And I've then reached out into the world on Twitter to see if other people had been banned. And I found out that a fair number of progressive left sites and people were banned Friday morning as well. So again, I go, that's interesting, more data. And so my working hypothesis, again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I try to look at empirical data, adjust it against my priors, and then come up with some new priors. My best thinking is that Facebook has been growing these machine learning based AIs to look for bad guys, have been having some considerable collateral damage along the way, but probably right after the inauguration, they turned the knobs on these things to make them more aggressive. Lower the score it took necessary for it to shoot you. Bam, 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 bam. And all of a sudden, and they probably did it Friday morning or Thursday night. Come Friday morning, it started shooting a whole bunch more people, completely innocent of any violation of terms of services, but just enough outside the circle of conventional thinking that their machines flagged it and they gunned it down. Very, very bad. And of course, the whole Facebook moderation thing is depraved in itself. I mean, particularly the Kafka-esque aspect. I've talked to numerous people now in the last 3 days who this has happened to, and a few others when we were fighting for Jordan and Brett. And nobody ever gets a reason. It's, you violated our terms of service, which is like 30 pages of gobbledygook. You are gone, right? They don't tell you what post. They don't tell you what part of the term of service. If you're not up in the death penalty ban like we were, you have a right to appeal, but the only thing you can do is send a picture of your ID, and that's all. You get no acknowledgement. And then even if your appeal is accepted, they don't even notify you. They just turn you back on. And the only way you find out is when your friends tell you that you're back on. It's like, what the hell is wrong with these people? That they would operate this bizarre hybrid of Franz Kafka and George Orwell to basically deal out virtual life and death on the biggest public square platform in the world. So anyway, that is where I am in my diagnosis of what happened. In terms of where we go from here, I think there's multiple levels. One, I think the Game B community is, at least certainly I will say, the core of the Game B community, though Game B community is kind of like a herd of cats. No guarantee that if the core goes one way, the cats will go with them. But it's our view that the time has come to de-emphasize Facebook. It's a toxic shithole anyway, for other reasons. The group itself is fine, but having to even be on Facebook kind of makes you feel icky. And so we are working on a alternative platform. Fortunately, I had created one back in December, early December. I just had this premonition, and it took me one day to pretty it up a little bit. And we now have, 35 testers on it. And if it survives that first level of test, we'll put 100 people on it. And if it survives that, we'll put 250 people on it. And if it survives that, we'll bring the whole community over, at least those that want to go. So, and then if we're able to do that, we'll gradually tune down the Facebook community, and perhaps over 6 months, it'll just be a place that points to the other community. Or it might be a holding room where people come in and chat a little bit, and if they're not too big of assholes, and they get invited to the other place. We're not quite sure. And we're probably not going to do it abruptly, but we do say we cannot trust Facebook. It clearly is an untrustworthy platform, which we knew all along, of course, but this just highlighted how untrustworthy it is, and that we better get going, God damn it, to not make it our permanent home. We also did some other things like, can't believe we didn't do this previously. I've been doing online for 40 years, so no excuse on my part other than complacency. But we've built secondary communication systems that are undisruptible, like Signal, things like that. And we're going to be collecting contact information from people and putting it in a safe, using a third-party repository that we can only get at it in an emergency, like if Facebook takes us down, so we can reach out to people via email. And so we're taking some immediate tactical fixes to resist an actual Facebook takedown, so they take the whole group down, as well as this very real effort to get us the hell off the Game B Facebook group relatively rapidly. So it's all been good. It's as my good friend Peter Wang, CEO of Anaconda, likes to say, things like this are a forcing function. You knew shit was fucked up, but hey, we're all busy. Complacency is a natural human characteristic, and so you don't do a damn thing about it. But a forcing function like even if it was entirely accidental, which is probably the case, attack on the leadership cadre of your Game B group and the expulsion of innocent members, that's a wake-up call to say all these things that we knew were bad and we knew that we shouldn't be doing, it finally has given us the motivation to do it. So, and of course, it's produced a whole bunch of new members, lots of publicity. Millions of people now know about us. I'm getting invites to podcasts right and left. I may well be telling this story on mainstream media sometime. Got some people working on that. So in the end, this is going to work to very significantly upregulate the signal from Game B, which is pretty fucking funny, actually. So that's probably all I really have to share at this point. Peter, you got any questions? You want to call me out on my bullshit?
Maybe we'll see what emerges. So we got a lot of great questions in the chat. The one that's coming to mind right now is like yourself. I'm hearing a lot of people from across the political spectrum, like reactionaries on the right or like anti-capitalists on the left, getting banned off Facebook mysteriously. But then some people aren't. Like I'm not really kind of understanding what is the rhyme or reason there. And do you have a sense of sort of like the mimetic contours of the Overton window of what is allowed, what is not allowed? Is that shaping yet?
My guess is that it doesn't correspond to the traditional Overton window. I mean, think about Game B itself. I mean, it's not even measurable in the context of the Overton window because it's entirely orthogonal to the kinds of shit that the Overton window tries to measure. And doesn't even talk about the things that the Overton window, at least the typical examples of people doing homebrew Overton window analysis, talk about. In any reasonable sense. We're probably so far out of it, probably literally they can't even measure us in that context. And as I said, I have found that it certainly is whacking people, not just people that are uncategorizable like Game B, but is certainly whacking people to the left into the socialist realm, but not that far into the socialist realm. I know less people on the right, but here at least third hand that some of those got whacked too, and of course they've been whacked earlier in some of the earlier iterations of the Facebook killing AI. So no, I guess the bottom line is I can't crisply say if I have any sense where the Overton window is, but I would say that the more one's thinking doesn't feel like status quo thinking, even if it's neither right nor left, you're at danger from the AIs as they're currently tuned.
Hmm. Is there any concern that, let's say, if this gets out, like Game B is being banned by Facebook, and like a reactionary right-wing movement might attach itself, especially if you go on something like Fox News or whatever, and that might kind of color Game B in popular imagination as like a reactionary movement?
It's something worth thinking about. And of course, we have had to expel a little group of I guess you'd call them white supremacist assholes, anti-Semites that had snuck into Game B last spring. And once we detected them, and interesting, they laid low for a while, and then they activated. And the instant they activated, we whacked them. So yeah, we would certainly have to look out for that. But I would say Game B is not fertile ground for reactionaries at all. I mean, it's if you try to project it into a left-right thing, it's got a lot more lefty to it than it does righty. I mean, when you start talking about eliminating status through possessions, that's going to be thought to be pretty loony left, I suspect. On the other hand, when you start talking about subsidiarity, that regulation of life should be at the lowest possible level in terms of the hierarchical stack, that'll appeal to certain classes of libertarians, but probably not to reactionaries, right? And the fact that we're radically about self-organizing rather than top-down command and control, should again make us appeal to perhaps anarcho-syndicalists and to some degree anarcho-capitalists, but again, not to, let's say neo-reaction or something like that advocates for monarchy or neo-feudalism. So yeah, it's an issue, but I would say we have a pretty good immune system to classic reactionaryism. That's not a good fit. And we're also not a good fit for classic socialism either. In fact, we say, we're not interested in 19th century ideologies of any sort. So something to be worth considering. But I think we got a pretty good now founder effect with 3,000 people or so in the Game B group, probably 30,000 in the wider Game B adjacent community that are relatively well tuned to not falling for the sucker games of the past.
Right. I'm going to pivot to Evan's question just to preface it. I recall, I think even before the Facebook group got created on Rally Point Alpha, there was like talks about migrating to MeWe even back then, and it didn't happen. So I'm curious, what took so long to actually have, like, why for forcing function, like as Peter Wang put it. So I'll take in, with that being said, I'll take in Evan.
Yeah, so my question is pretty related to Peter's here. My question is, so like I've really been introduced to Game B thought through the Stoa primarily, and I'd heard of it and found it somewhat interesting. But when I found that the primary coordination mechanism for Game B was a Facebook group, I lost most interest in that until I found a place like the Stoa, because I have a personal ethical commitment to not use Facebook for reasons that are directly related to the sort of situation you guys found yourself in over the past week. So I'm curious why Facebook was even selected or allowed to be the central coordination node for this sort of activity, given that these sorts of problems with Facebook have been obvious to anyone who's paying attention for the past, 10 plus years.
Damn good question. Well, it's interesting. Life is full of frozen accidents, and if you look at the story of this is told pretty well in a documentary film from Rebel Wisdom. I forget the name of it, but it's basically Brett Weinstein and I and David Fuller having a discussion about the history of Game B. And in late 2013, we put Game B into so-called spore mode. We decided as an active entity, it had outlived its purpose. Internal dissension was making it not worth the effort anymore. But spore mode meant take what you have learned and go out in the world. And when the season is right, some of these spores, which are like the seeds of mushrooms or ferns, primitive plants or pre-plants, some of those spores will re-bloom, and Game B will come back to life someday. Okay, so that was that. I went on to do other things. And however, one of the last things I did in my Game B head janitor role was to start a Facebook group for people to be able to just catch up with each other. I think it had 45 additional members, 65 members, basically the original old gangsters of Game B from the 2013 active movement. And that's all it was for several years. One post a month, hey, I just took a new job here, or I moved to California, or whatever. And then for reasons that are still a little unclear, in the summer of, was it 2019 or 2018? I don't really remember. And one or the other. I think it must have been 2019. 2019, because some of the people that had continued to work Game B more than me, frankly, people like Daniel Schmachtenberger and Jordan Hall and some other folks started appearing on podcasts. And Brett Weinstein started his podcast. I started my podcast, which did not have a Game B focus, but we did have some Game B people on it. And so there was this little mimetic swarm all of a sudden in the summer of 2019. And without us actually even pointing to it, I don't think, people started finding the Game B group on Facebook and started organizing there. And so it was, and then I went on my annual 6-month Facebook sabbatical, right as it went from about 100 of the old Game B plus a few random accretions. Maybe it was 120 when I took my annual 6-month break from Facebook, because like you, Evan, I find it a morally objectionable thing. My little fudge is I'm on Facebook 6 months a year. That's been my modus operandi for 4 years. So I'm willing to take what I can get out of it for 6 months a year, and I just say forget it for 6 months. So anyway, I was the sole admin because it was a totally inactive group, just 1 or 2 posts a month. But I could see the thing was starting to bubble a little bit. And so before I left in July 2019, I appointed 2 acting admins to take care of the place while I was gone. And during that time, it grew from 100 to 1,000 in 6 months and came to life. And truthfully, I'm not 100% sure why. So it was one of these frozen accidents in history. It was there for a different purpose. And it happened to be the point that people found when the spores started to sprout in the spring and summer of 2019. Not what we had done, not where we would have been if we had done this consciously. The original Game B home was on a private network on Basecamp, and we still have all that amazing material. I don't know, 20, 30,000 posts, and there's some amazing shit in there. And if we had consciously restarted Game B, we probably would have done it on a private network, but we didn't. And in terms of why it stayed there, this is interesting. We knew it was not a good place to be long term, and so we tried to fork to various other places. I think one of the earliest ones was Reddit. There's still a Game B Reddit subreddit, and in fact, I've just engaged a new moderator over there to try to liven that up. But people don't like Reddit. Most people don't. I have a theory on why. Even though functionally it's actually better for the kind of stuff we do than Facebook is. But I have a theory that a lot of people are not willing to subject themselves to a potential downvote. And Reddit has this upvote, downvote thing. And particularly women, but a lot of men too, do not like being exposed to a downvote. And frankly, I don't give a shit. You don't like me, fuck you is my attitude. But I know I'm way over on the far extreme on sort of, cast iron skin, don't give a rat's ass. And most people aren't there. And so people that are more sensitive, I think, find the exposure to downvotes psychologically problematic, I guess I should say. The other thing is it's butt ugly. We've cleaned it up a little bit, made it look a little better, but it's a wall of words. It's whatever. It just doesn't work. So we tried it, didn't go. We started a MeWe site. I don't know, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, partially just as a default safety bolt hole in case Facebook whacked us. And I think there's 30 or 40 members on it. The functionality is like Facebook, but weaker. Never took off, but it was there. It was handy as a little temporary rallying point. We have a Discord server, which is cool, and it's pretty active. But Discord is another screwy architecture. You have to have a special link to get into it, and the links expire after 30 days. And so you can't just go to gameb.discord and get in, or even to apply to get in, which is screwed up and makes it an unsuitable long-term home. I've been looking at potential private homes for a year and looked at a whole bunch, set up little test platforms on a long list of white label platform operators, and always found reasons that I didn't like them. They didn't have an app. They were web only, and if you want to appeal to millennials, you better have an app. God damn it! They were too ugly. Circle.so, for instance, that some people like. That's what Rebel Wisdom uses. Functionally, it's okay, but man, is it butt ugly. Wall of text, right? And for people that are more audio or video or image oriented, not going to appeal to them. Zoho has a very interesting platform full of all kinds of interesting functionality, but it's confusing and not appealing to a regular user. I go down the line. You want me to give you a whole evaluation of almost every known white label platform I can do it. So I finally found one that I think will work. And it looks good. It's got all the functionality we need, and yet is not confusing to the user. Presents a clean interface, etc. So as I said, we're testing it right now. It's about 35 people. If it survives a week, we'll move it up to 250 people. If that survives a week, we'll take it up to 1,000 people and see if the architecture is amenable to a community of that size or larger. So anyway, that's a long answer to a short question.
Cool. Evan, do you have a quick follow-up?
Hopefully quick, yeah. So I'm curious if you and the other Game BOG or leader types have taken any lessons regarding the relationship of sunk costs, path dependence, and their relationship to anti-fragility of your communities from this experience.
Yeah, though I'm not sure we actually learned anything because we knew it, but humans are lazy, and we didn't act upon. I mean, we acted upon it a bit. We had the diversified platforms, and so that was more than most people do. But we didn't ever feel sufficiently motivated to act in a radically anti-fragile mode. And oh, by the way, even this private platform we're going to, it still is potentially chokeable. And so I'm working with people associated with the distributed web, but distributed web technology is not ready for prime time for normal human level functionality, unfortunately, but it may be in a couple of years. And that's a better answer. There's still one choke point left, even with distributed web. And that's really, really hard for the chicken chokers to get their hands on, but they might. So even more long-term, 5 years out, non-IP networks, we're thinking about them. So I think we didn't lack the theory, but we fell into normal human complacency. But I think we've now had the forcing function that's going to put us on a long-term path to be right at the cutting edge as soon as the capabilities are there for DWeb, and then for perhaps Urbit, and then some even deeper non-IP based networking that comes after that.
Cool. Okay, Brent Cooper, you got a question. Only one follow-up though, because we're short for time, and no debating.
Thanks. Hey, Jim.
Hi, Brent.
So my question, well, to foreground, a little less than a year ago, I was kicked out of the Game B group, banned. And I know it's not the same thing as being banned by Facebook itself, but as you said, lefties have been banned and censored lately. And so there's a lot of algorithms making mistakes, also a bit of a shakeup. But my question is, why do you deserve an appeal and this kind of mobilization for your ban? And why do you deserve a soapbox to talk about it when I also sort of request an appeal and to like table what actually happened? And I argue I was rejected on bogus grounds, just like you would argue you were banned by Facebook on bogus grounds. So why the double standard, and why the potential hypocrisy when I think we can all do better? What's the difference between you and Zuckerberg in this context?
That's an excellent question, and one I've been asked before. Well, first, I'm a great believer that people and groups organized around a common interest ought to have tools to curate their ecosystem. And I think that's fine. I think Game B group or a group of Packard owners, if people are not playing by the rules that the community have established, shoot them out. And we gave reasons why we toss people out. What it is in your case. I'm not going to go into it, but we were quite explicit why you were bounced, unlike Zuckerberg. In the same way, individuals have the right to block people, and that should continue. So I think it's very, very different than throwing people off the broad public square versus individuals and affinity groups grooming and gardening their own space the way they want to. So I think that's different. Now, in terms of why is it that I should be able to whip up a large mob and reach out to people who have connections into Facebook, I'll answer the answer to that is it's not fair. It's fucking hideous. In fact, 99.9% of people who had what happened to me have no recourse at all. The fact that I just happen to have access to a mob, frankly, highlights the injustice of the whole goddamn thing. So that's my answer to that question, that Facebook needs to have, frankly, I think in the short term, Facebook needs to have due process and transparency, as I said before. But I've also come around finally to the view that I was wrong, and most of us old-time internet people were wrong about net libertarianism, at least within the context of our current architectures. And we do need to have democratic regulation of the platforms. Things like Facebook need to be redefined as common carriers. There needs to be regulation on how people are kicked off, including due process, and our constitutional rights need to apply. And that's in the short term. We maybe will get back to net libertarianism once we have things like the DWeb, and particularly when we get to the non-IP network 5 years out or so.
Follow-up question, Brent?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that answer, especially the second part about the asymmetry of power and influence being unfair. My only follow-up is just to say, earlier you said Game B is not a fertile ground for reactionaries, and that's a big factor of the reason I was ejected, because I was arguing that that was the case and that there was a lot of reactionary people, and at the time people didn't even know what that word meant. They kind of rejected it and questioned it. So, you know, I respect the curation versus censorship argument, but also I think there's a meta question that wants to emerge here about free speech, let's say.
Yep. I'm a goddamn tough free speech person, right? At the extreme. You know, that's just me personally. That's not necessarily a Game B position. I don't think Game B particularly has a position on it one way or the other. But I will personally say that I'm a pretty close to free speech absolutist, though I will say that the characteristics, and by the way, let me be crystal clear. I believe communists should be able to speak, as the U.S. Supreme Court has held. I believe Nazis should be free to speak. I believe Islamicists should be free to speak, so long as they don't advocate violence. And so I'm pretty damn far down the road of free speech absolutism. On the other hand, I do think there's some characteristics of our platforms which should provide some room for some democratic regulation, so long as it's not viewpoint regulation. So, for instance, I would suggest that our legislators ought to be able to consider things like outlawing doxing, allowing platforms, if they want to modulate vocabulary. You know, if someone wants to run a platform where you're not allowed to say fuck, that should be okay, right? I wouldn't be on it, goddammit, but things that are content neutral, no nudity like Facebook nominally has, I would say that's okay, as long as it's not viewpoint censorship. I think that is the thing. And I think also personal attacks could be outlawed. Using obscene language against another user, which is actually one of our Game B rules, might also well be reasonable for regulation, so long as it does not discriminate based on viewpoint.
All right. Reed, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. I'm hearing a bit about some of the consequences that might emerge from this, like a kind of Streisand effect. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on simply being identified by if the hypothesis is correct, that this is some kind of AI flagging of a disruptive community. I'm wondering if you see some hope or promise or kind of confidence inspiration simply in that you've reached some level of awareness of the AIs, like you've got their attention or something like that.
Actually, I wish Zuckerberg had personally attacked us, right? That would have been the best. And we talked about that. Said, God damn it, if it really was a conspiracy, now we have some shit to talk about, right? But to be sort of collateral damage to mistuned AIs, which at least, I don't know if that's absolutely correct, but I think it fits Occam's razor on the data, is probably less useful in that regard. Because lots of people have been bitten by the damn thing, some of them just individuals, right? So I think the fact that we're engaged, I think the one flag we can fly is we are engaged in thought. If my hypothesis is correct, is that AI has accidentally evolved a thought killer. We can feel good about the fact and pat ourselves on the back that we must be thinking, or the AI wouldn't have got us. So that's about as far as it goes. And by the way, that's going to be my theme going forward here. I've been freelancing much more here than normal because this is a community that understands these things. But as I go further out into the public sphere, I'm going to be framing this as Facebook's war on thought, which I think is a very interesting hook. And I will admit, I don't believe they're doing it on purpose, but that's what they're doing.
Any follow-up, Reed?
Yeah, I guess that's interesting to reframe it as a war on thought. I'm curious if you, that probably has the best kind of mimetic potential. I'm curious if you think that Facebook's war seems to be on disruptive thought rather than just thought in general, because as long as you think on Facebook in alignment with patterns that Facebook is interested in, that seems to be permissible. But any kind of disruptive thought, does that drive with where you think maybe that's going?
I would use Jordan Hall's saying that an awful lot of what Facebook finds acceptable is simulated thinking. It's not actually thought. It's rubber stamps, boom, boom, unless you carefully curated your Facebook feed, there's almost no thought on it. It's just rubber stamps. It's simulated thinking. So I think if you're doing non-simulated thinking, doing actual thinking about socio-political economic, in the socio-political economic domain, then you have a significant chance of being targeted. And I think that is the line. And go back and look at people in the store are probably a little different. Go look at your mother's Facebook feed, right? And see how much actual thinking is happening there. I'm going to say most of it would fit into a very small thimble.
All right, let's see if we can sneak in one or two more questions.
By the way, Peter, I'm fine on time. We want to run over a little bit. That works for me.
Cool. Tom Beakbane, you had a question. I posted it below.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So Jim, in terms of this war on thought, I've got a hypothesis, I suppose, that this isn't just a matter of censorship. In actual fact, we're looking at a tsunami towards conformist thinking, and it's now regarded as being disagreeable to say something that's mildly controversial or could be interpreted as an irritant to a group. And I feel that the roots of that run really deep in academia. And kids these days are being taught that that knowledge is all about facts, and you can evaluate a fact using a multiple choice exam, and that's a massive difference to the education that I'm an old guy, I'm over 60. That's a massive difference to the education that I experienced, where we were taught to be skeptical of everything, frankly, and we were taught to express ourselves. So, what's your thought about sort of reinterpreting this as not a war sort of against Facebook, but a deeper war against just a social movement towards conformist thinking?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely part of the outer framing, right? That as we've seen over the last few years, orthodoxy in the public sphere has been increasing with troll mobs on both sides. And the interesting thing is that you can be attacked by trolls of either dimension. It's and they're both trying to form different conformities, essentially, which is quite bizarre. But yeah, so I think that something like the platforms are operating in that broader tendency towards forced conformity into Team Red and Team Blue, as we'd say in the United States, whatever the color codes are in other places. I think UK, they're the opposite, right? But it's interesting that I think Facebook's gone way further than the other platforms. You compare Facebook to Twitter, for instance. Twitter nails people occasionally, but they don't seem to be just mass whacking people who are engaged in public thought the way Facebook does. So I think there's a pervasive social wide order towards conformity and thinking. I'm old enough. I'm probably even older than you. I was a real old motherfucker, right? I remember the 60s, God damn it. I went to the two biggest anti-war demonstrations in DC, the mobilization and the moratorium, right? And I remember when people would stick it to the man, right? And now, maybe we stick it to the other guy's man, but we're not willing to stick it to the man in general, and to deviate from conventional thinking in the broader social sphere has become vastly more common, particularly over the last few years. So I think you're right about the greater social framing, but I think Facebook has taken it way further than the other platforms.
That's cool.
Cool. All right. Benita Roy has a question. She wants me to read it. Do you agree with Twitter banning Trump?
That's a good question. I think that the answer is, at least in the short term, yes. I think you can make the case that through grotesque lies and at least irresponsible behavior on the ellipse on January 6th, if not actually criminal behavior, and it's borderline, his utterly irresponsible and perhaps insane rhetoric specifically led to violence. So I would have, if I were Jack, I would have banned Trump, God damn it, on the 6th. For how long to ban him, I don't know. 30 days, maybe 90 days, something like that. Probably should let him back in. But yep, I think I would have banned him.
All right. Benita has no follow-up. How about Daryl? You had a question above, if you'd like to.
So giving Facebook the benefit of the doubt in this, in a way, like how does Game B distinguish itself on that platform anyhow, to continue to do it and say what it wants to say, and also to distance itself from the QAnon and the other stuff? Like, clearly, if the AIs are doing it, there's other people that are thinking that non-blue church thinking is bad, and yet we as Game Bers are different from QAnon and from other conspiracy theories, and we're not a conspiracy theory as near as we can tell. So how do we still maintain our presence and show up in media without getting classified by others as conspiracy theory?
I think for the time being, while Game B is small, we don't care. In fact, we actually like to be persecuted, right? Nothing better to get publicity than persecution. And I will say that we have a pretty tough crew on the Game B community so far. And I don't think they're intimidated by these assholes. And so I think we just keep doing what we're doing and call them out when they fuck with us, build alternative platforms to rally back to, and then come back and strike back. One of the things we're going to do, I'm sure, from the private platform is, develop rhetoric to take back out to the world, to game the AIs essentially. So yeah, I would say that we deal with it in a classic war fighting mode. We understand it's out there, but we don't let it intimidate us.
Any follow-up, Daryl? So if you have any more questions, throw it in the chat. We're probably going to end soon. Questions is emerging. Let's see if I can riff on it. How attached are you to the term Game B? Because I imagine a lot of the good stuff that Game B or people who are into Game B talk about can be expressed with various different attractors. And if, I know that's kind of a rallying point, but how open are you for different versions of it popping up, talking about the same stuff, essentially?
We're all in favor of it. In fact, one of my other projects, which I've talked about only a teeny bit in public, is something called the Big Change Coalition. This is something that was actually in the original Game B spec back in 2013, August 2013, when we kind of did the best final thinking on what Game B was. And we're actually now actively working behind the scenes to catalyze the first meeting of the Big Change Coalition, which is the idea that, yes, indeed, there are lots of people doing things that are moving in a generally the same direction towards a better world. But are doing it from their own perspectives, with their own values, with their own priorities, et cetera. And that's good. And the the Big Change Coalition is to bring all these people together so they can hear each other. Each group can describe its approach, and no desire whatsoever to master brand it Game B at all. And the idea for the rapper slug goes to Bruce Kunkel, who was another one of the OGs of Game B. He started using this term early, called alignment beyond agreement. And that's going to be the tagline for the Big Change Coalition, that we all are aligned on our missions and we see the world sort of similarly. We have completely different perspectives on what we think is the most important and what we should deal with first. And we're just going to do what we think is right. But we're going to make sure we know about what each other is up to. We're going to communicate horizontally with each other. We're going to help each other where appropriate. So all in favor of it. And in fact, I'm well aware that there are many, 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 many people in the world doing things that we would call Game B, never heard of Game B. And that's a good thing.
Cool. So we have one more question. That's from Ola. He's from Nigeria, and his question is, what is your take on Game B spreading to Africa? What potentials do you see there, and perhaps other continents that are non-Western?
It's an interesting question. I'm not really sure. I think that we are open source the Game B ideas so that anyone who wants to adapt them to their local situation should definitely feel free, and we would encourage them to do so. I would say that, again, for accidents of history, the vast majority of Game B people currently are in the West, I would say. Though there's a growing number of non-West people. It's very interesting that the Game B group is now less than 50% USA, which I think is very, very interesting. Though most of the members, non-USA, are from places like UK, Sweden, Australia, Germany, etc. But there are a fair number from India and Bangladesh. I don't know if they're from Nigeria or not. Probably a few. So again, by historical contingency, the thing started in the West, and probably is more aimed at. I don't know if aimed is the right word, but it was contemplated from a perspective of people with a Western perspective. But is wide open to anyone who thinks they can adapt it to their situation, and would encourage them to do so. And we'd love to hear back and have people participate from other cultures. I'll give you one example of somebody who's really adapted the Game B perspective, and we have adapted some of his thinking from a non-Western perspective, is Tyson Yunkaporta, from an indigenous person in Australia. Who I have had on my podcast 3 times, and he and I have become good buddies. And he's pointed out the amazing number of touch points between Game B thinking and at least his particular sub-ethnicity amongst Australian Aboriginal cultures. And so that is neat. I think that is just wonderful. I'd love for someone to do that with other cultures that are not, strictly speaking, Western.
Right. So we're at the top of the hour now. Any closing thoughts you'd like to leave us with, Jim? Any kind of action plan that people can get excited about with this project?
Start using the hashtag war on thought. God damn it. Right. You don't need to add the God damn it. If you think when you see something like this happening, don't fall for conspiracy theories. It's easy to say, oh, the conspiracy's out to get Game B. Well, some of our Game B people think that too. But truthfully, we're still pretty small. The chances that we're in somebody's crosshairs, I think, is relatively unlikely. So, don't leap to the conspiracy theory explanation for anything. Try to think hard. I confessed I had conspiracy theories for about an hour on Friday. But I think after more careful analysis and evaluating my priors and the data, I think the accidental collateral damage from a mistuned AI is more likely. Don't let them intimidate you. God damn it. It's a war. It's going to be a long war, and that's okay.
Very cool. So thank you so much for coming today, Jim. I'm glad you left your pistol and your knife downstairs. Yeah, it's dangerous. And I tried not to use the M word, so maybe next time when you come on. So upcoming events, we have a bunch on the STOA website. We're having Patreon-only events, and we're having something called Steal the Culture with Dialogos. One is on female rivalry with Raven, Connolly, Maybe Gray, Tarn, and Ayla Girl, and they're going to talk about, female rivalry, something that people don't talk much about. So that should be exciting. You can check that out on thestoa.ca. That being said, Jim, everyone, thanks for coming to Stoa.
Hey, thanks, Peter. As always, you guys do great work here.
Thank you, my friend. And we'll enjoy